Hey everyone, I'm Boom.
And I'm Spice. This is Boom and Spice Book Advice. It's a very unique episode because we've got a couple of factors sort of working against us this time around. We've had a bout of just like we're like ships passing in the night. We just can't seem to get our schedules to align, despite me working 3 days a week, which is it's like inexplicable. I don't know.
This is as free as we get in terms
Exactly.
of like both of us being available and near each other,
hmm
and as far as we've ever been.
And now it's like 8 o'clock at night. His girlfriend's gonna come in at any second. So that's that situation. And I just had a fuzzy little animal grab me by the arm. See, Boom owns a cat named Sheldon. And this nice young man is named Sheldon for what reason, Boom?
He is named after Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory because he never stops talking, as
Exactly.
you'll soon find out.
So, if you hear chirping in the background, no, one of us does not own a macaw. No, neither of us are watching Nat Geo Wild with like meerkats. No, it's a little anxious, attention starved cat, just desperate to be touched while we're doing stuff. So keep that in mind. It has next to nothing to do with To Kill a Mockingbird, with the exception that To Kill a Mockingbird features animals. So,
there, are, there are animals within the book.
so if that's a meaningful literary connection for you, I'm glad I could draw it. I hope I hope that's some good Boom and Spice book advice for you. And on that note, let's get on with the show.
Okay, so I guess we can start off with our first impressions
Exactly.
without any spoilers, because we'll get to that later. Um, I guess I'll go ahead and start out with it wasn't my favorite book, especially compared to the first book in the series, Frankenstein. It was slow. I don't think it was as relevant as it might have used to have been.
Yeah, it had its day.
And yeah, I did not have as good a time as I've had reading other books.
See, it's slow in a less deliberate way because Frankenstein is slow in a plotting sort of like Frankenstein is more akin to a series than a movie, if that makes any sense. But To Kill a Mockingbird is the length of like half of Frankenstein in terms of the actual good stuff in it, but it just stretches itself out, and it really it bogs you down. Bogs you down.
Yeah, yeah. The amount of stuff happening does not correlate to the length of the book or
Exactly.
the long-windedness of the book.
It's weird to think that the book that is venerated as a civil rights sort of not quite anthem but touchstone would be even more bizarre than the one about reanimating corpses, and somehow about as, if not less, progressive. And we'll touch on that in a moment. And I feel as though this book, if we were to get into the advice section of Boom and Spice book advice, it's not worth reading cover to cover. Not for enjoyment, not for comprehension. It's the most schmoopable book ever. You can,
Yeah, I agree 100%. This is one you can get. You'd probably get a little bit better. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's not right, but you'd get just as much and maybe have a better feeling about the book if you had just spark notes it. Because at least then you just have here's what we want you to get from it.
Mhm.
Here's what I got from it, and there you go. Instead of getting to read that whole thing and just being like, "What in the world?"
And it's
and
been,
being upset.
yeah, yeah. And it's been like so filtered over the years. It's sort of in the same vein as The Great Gatsby, where if you're writing an essay, any essay you write will have been written before about this book. Every symbol, every theme, every character, every scene, every plot point, every piece of context that you could possibly suss out of this book has already been extracted and written about in multiple pages. And it's useful in that sense. Spark Notes will be populated by details tailor-made for you to write an essay about it. So if you're given a choice between this book and something else, in terms of writing an essay or doing a project, choose this book. But in terms of getting progressive themes, in terms of reading a good book, there's other options. There's a lot of other options.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't hate anymore if I got assigned this book for an essay, because it'd make for a pretty easy writing. And you could take the time you would normally take to read a book and read a book you like.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I guess it's a win.
Yeah, you could read Frankenstein by chance.
Yeah, read Franken.
Exactly.
Less book,
far better.
Better stuff.
Exactly. Way more interesting. Now, there's one thing that Frankenstein and To Kill a Mockingbird have in common, other than that they're written by, female authors and that they're like books. That they're kind of books. They're literature to some degree. They each have popular adaptations, and I've watched the movie of To Kill a Mockingbird, and it doesn't cut that much. So you could probably reliably watch the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, Spark Notes it, and then you're fine. Pretty reliably. It's not worth the read. That being said, would you go paperback or ebook for this book you don't want to read?
This one, I ended up going audiobook, but I don't know that that is the way I'd go again, just because I feel like I get through books faster paperback. So I feel like I wouldn't have spent like almost 2 weeks of just trying to put off, like, not wanting to listen to this and listening to other books and then getting back to this. Like, if I would have just sat down, got a book, and read it, it would have taken me like 2 days.
Yeah, it's not a long read, and it's not a substantive read, so I totally agree with you there. And finally, this feels kind of obvious. Would you recommend this for someone else?
Okay, yeah. If you haven't picked it up, I don't think I'd recommend this one. Definitely not for someone looking to just read it because, like we said,
Absolutely.
if you get to pick it for a school project and you got another book that you never get to read for school that you're trying to read, maybe pick it up and then you get to do the whole Spark Notes, read a different book deal. But no, I wouldn't read this for enjoyment.
No, it's not worth it at all. I quite disliked this book.
I wouldn't read it for enrichment either.
Exactly.
I
wouldn't read it with a fox. I wouldn't read it in a box. Wouldn't read it on a plane. I wouldn't read it on a train. None of the above. So, on that note, if you plan on, for some godforsaken reason, reading this book by choice and not like by gunpoint, cut out now because we're about to get into spoilers. Thank you for listening to Boom and Spice Book Advice. I hope you come back once you've read it and you can laugh at our commentary about the weird nonsense that's in this book.
Yep, and better books are to come.
Exactly. Next week.
This was necessary evil.
Exactly.
Don't worry about it.
As a matter of fact, for all the listeners leaving, all of our listeners that are leaving during the non-spoiler section, next week we will be covering Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. It's not as popular in America as it is in Britain and other areas of the EU. However, it is a book that is absolutely worth your time. It is a Gothic literature piece. It's a slow burn. It's the biggest book that we've read so far. However, it is an absolute page turner. It's the sort of book you don't want to put down. I absolutely recommend you take your time with it before we come out with that podcast because it's a very fun book.
Yeah, some pre-advice to the book advice.
Exactly. We got to prime the pump. Exactly. Yeah, that's some WD-40 for our eventual book advice podcast. And on that note, thank you for being with us. And now on to the spoilers. First and foremost, there's a connection I drew between. You're aware of who Bob Dylan is, right?
I am.
Yeah, that guy. So
I think I've heard of it.
Bob Dylan is a American singer-songwriter who's been active since the 1960s. And he came out with one of my favorite albums in 1964 called The Times They Are A-Changin'. And it carries a lot of progressive and forward-thinking themes. This is noteworthy because you know what came out 2 years before The Times They Are A-Changin'?
Could it be?
Oh,
this
man.
book?
In fact, it is. And if you listen to some of the tracks off that album, it is significantly more progressive than this book. For instance, there's a song called The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, which the name is important because if you think about To Kill a Mockingbird, it is not named after Tom Robinson. He's not the focal point, but he is the victim. And if you look at The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, where another person of color is abused under the guise of racism, in her case, she was a restaurant worker who was assaulted and killed over a disagreement with a wealthy white landowning young man in his 20s who was drunk at the time, and he ended up getting off nearly scot-free. And if you look at where the presence is put, if there's a camera looking at someone in the piece, the person in that song that the camera is placed upon is Hattie Carroll. It's pointed at her. And in To Kill a Mockingbird, the mockingbird is used as a symbol for people of color. However, the person who uses that turn of phrase is Atticus Finch. So it really puts the spotlight on him, which plays into the trope of the white savior, which is a sort of pseudo-progressive trope. It's sort of the gentrification of novels. And without it, there actually being gentrification of novels, people jumping into settings and using characters that aren't really for them without proper context, things like that. But you get my point. I hate to ramble, but it's just an interesting juxtaposition. Because you look at this, he's only 2 years after her. For all we know, this song was in gestation before she came out with that novel, or they were thought of in tandem together. They could be the same amount of progressive, but they're not, and that says something. That someone who, in effect, is her contemporary, is more progressive than her in the way that he talks about people of color and their misfortunes in America done unto them by white people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up. And the word pseudo-progressive is a good one for this book. There's a lot of themes and a lot of things going on that could almost seem like, I guess I sort of understand how this used to be a progressive deal, but like you said, this is only 2 years after. But yeah, where you have the focal point of the book is a white man and his daughter. It's like sort of like a biology. It's a story about Jean Louise Finch, and it's pseudo sort of about the life of Harper Lee.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
You know, it's not
In the same way that On the Road
completely,
was
but
sort of there's a word
yeah,
for it.
there
I
are
might need to look it up. You can
Yeah.
continue talking.
yeah, she's got.
I know there's a word for it.
There are a lot of ties between her actual upbringing in the South as a young white girl and the book. And for her to be the main character in a book and the one developing as a character when you're trying to be a progressive novel is a little counterintuitive.
See, this is it's meant to be an example of a roman a clef or Ramon a clef. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Where it's someone writing a story that resembles their own life, and they swap out names and characters for fictional people, and they have it play out. And I feel like that's important because she centers the story on not just Jean, but in this case, then Harper, and that she sees herself as the focal point of what is an attempt at being progressive. And it's reminiscent of there's a song by Phil Oakes, who is a very progressive folk singer from the 1960s and 70s, who wrote a song called "Love Me, I'm a Liberal," which is about people who are sort of trying to be faux left wing and make it seem as though they're more progressive than they are, but then behind closed doors or based on their actions that get strung together, a profile can be made, and you realize that they're not really as progressive as they are. There's a line that I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially says, you know, I love you guys. I love all the black people and the Hispanics, but don't move next to me. It's like that's sort of that's reminiscent of Harper Lee, where it's like, yeah, I'll write a story about black people. I'll call out systemic oppression, but it's gonna be a story about a white woman and a white guy who's meant to be the ultimate savior of what's of the troubles of this black guy, and it's really it's troubling, to be honest.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. It's almost the same exact theme going on in the book itself, where you have Atticus, and he's portrayed as the foremost authority of this book in the treatment of people of color. And even him, he's sympathizing with these like blatant racists.
Absolutely.
He's teaching his kids to humanize them and put up with it because that's just how things are. He's not doing anything to disrupt the status quo of this town of Macomb. He believes in better, but he doesn't expect anybody else to.
Yeah, which is not a very progressive.
And that's
way
not.
to go about it.
And if you're the number one guy who's trying to teach your kids,
And you're
that's
like,
not the
hey,
thinking
we
you
need
can
to
have.
coexist with racists
Yep, and your kids-
black people, I guess. That's
and your
not
kids
good.
are outraged at this trial because he's, the trial is totally
Sham,
rigged.
yeah.
It's not legitimate at all, and they think Atticus has won because he's the one who presented the evidence, and then when he loses, instead of also being outraged, he tells his kids, like, hey, this is just how it is. We didn't have a shot, but we tried.
Yeah, exactly, and that's fine for you. That's a fine concession, but he's going to be killed.
Yep.
Like that's his life on the line. This is just you wanting to be progressive. That's on the line here. It's like, well, maybe the next guy, without attempting to make systemic change, without petitioning your government. See, that's a part of why when people look at the protests and the riots that go on, and they shake their heads, but they don't try and fix any of the problems that get called out. It's reminiscent of this, where Atticus can be as outraged. He can shake his fist with his little cigar in his mouth, like a corncob pipe. Like, I don't mean to bring him back to Frosty the Snowman a bit and his button nose, but yeah, he's just, oh, why I oughta, oh boy, is it unfortunate that this innocent black man's gonna be killed by the state. It's like, you're kind of underplaying it there, sir.
Yeah, it's not just unfortunate. It's not okay.
It's not okay at all.
It's got to change.
And Bob Dylan, in The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, talks about how that trial was essentially a sham. The guy was just convicted and sentenced to a 6-month sentence for killing a woman in broad daylight. And then he says, he spends the entire song teasing that you shouldn't cry yet. You shouldn't be upset yet. Then the sentencing happens, and he says, bury your rags deep in your face. Now is the time for your tears. And that is reminiscent of this trial, where it's a sham. It's almost a kangaroo court. And he's found guilty because, of course, he is. Instead of being like Bob Dylan, who's outraged over this, he calls it, he treats it like a travesty. And he says, now's the time for tears. Now's the time to be upset. Not that she died, which is still an incredible tragedy, but the fact that the man who did it will not be held accountable, not off of merit, but due to the connections he has and the color of his skin, what he has in his pants. And it's very reminiscent of this. And the fact that Atticus just has to be aw shucks. It speaks to the lack of true progressive ideals within this novel.
Absolutely. From the beginning to the end of the novel, nothing happens. You end up in the same place, progressively speaking, as you started.
Exactly.
They're going to keep on going, convicting wrongfully people of color for, and that especially after the trial. But I mean, they make it a ridiculous trial to prove, how bad it is. But then nothing. Yeah. There's no protest. It's just a, gee darn, like.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the trials for the people who murdered Emmett Till and how they were found not guilty and then afterwards were paid by tabloids to tell their story, and they were like, yeah, we did it. And it was obvious they did it. Everyone knew they did it. It was abundantly clear, and they still got off. And I feel like she took some inspiration from that. The only thing is, the mother of Emmett Till actually did something. As opposed to dressing up the corpse or having a closed casket, she had an open casket for the funeral, for the wake. So she forced people to look at how he'd been maimed, for how he'd been abused, for how he'd been tortured. And it shed a light on the barbarity of it, on the sheer inhumanity of the people who did that to Emmett Till. And the fact that they go, well, Tom Robinson's dead. That's unfortunate. That is absolutely messed up, in my opinion. And the fact that she sees fit, it's dehumanizing, this novel, where you go, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, yeah.
You're comparing people of color to innocent animals that are weak and inautonomous and there to either be abused or protected by white people.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost relate. They explain the mockingbirds. You don't kill mockingbirds because all they do is make music and they don't mess with anybody. And that almost, I mean, if you're taking that literally, it's almost like if a black person doesn't break the law and does what we say, don't mess with them. Yeah. Don't mess with them. Like, really, that's...
It strips them of their autonomy. It's either they're these objects of hate where they're dehumanized and they're treated as lesser and as criminals by default, or and as scapegoats. Or you have the alternative, where they're not treated like autonomous people. They're treated like docile, innocent little animals to be coddled and left unexamined. And that's not okay either. They ought to be treated with equity, where you look at their situation and you look at what they did and you judge them by the merits of that situation and by the merits of their character. That's how it ought to be. And to treat them like they're just there for your amusement or for your protection is almost as bad and way more insidious than the alternative. It's easy to go, yeah, we hate racism, but it's not as easy to go, yeah, people of color do messed up stuff, just like everybody else. And they ought to be treated like people, not like dogs, which I thank you,
Yep,
Harper Lee.
Here we go.
Oh, the main event.
Blatant symbolism.
Oh my goodness. I've never seen a symbol this obvious. It's like a stop sign symbolizing need to stop at a road. It's that just blatant. She gives a dog a last name with a similar amount of syllables to Robinson. And it's just so blatant. Tim Johnson, Tom Robinson. And Atticus shoots the dog because he has some sort of mange or
mad dog
rabies.
disease,
Yeah,
they're
exactly. And it's just a repugnant way of going about that. And once again, it puts the power in the hands of the white person in the situation. It's lazy and gross. And I wish it wasn't in this book. And the only funny part, other than the dog having a last name and it being so blatant, is that there's currently not a UFC, an MMA fighter in Bellator who's been very successful, named Tim Johnson. He's got the exact same name as this dog. And it wouldn't be as funny if the dog's name was just Tim, like any sort of animal. Sheldon doesn't have a last name, because of course he doesn't. He's a cat. Who thinks like that? She had time to think about this. It's not like this.
She did that on purpose.
Exactly. She ran that through publishers and editors.
Yeah.
It's
was like
mind-boggling.
Yeah, she aimed to show us this. This was intentional.
If it wasn't for the butterfly effect, I had a time machine, I'd go back in time and say, hey, maybe you should implement your symbols with a little more tact, ma'am. And I'm afraid I'd cease to exist.
I love that. After having watched The Butterfly Effect, I am an expert on time travel.
But imagine. All right, the dog's name would be Tim. Okay, and then I just start fading. Gotta change.
Wait, it hurts.
Gotta change it back, please. I don't know what would prompt that though. My parents never met because the dog's name is just Tim. It's I don't know.
Hey, that movie, that.
Oh man, yeah. Suddenly I'm turning translucent. I'm fading. It's like the end of Endgame. Yeah, I don't feel too good, Mr. Boom.
Mr. Boom.
In this case, Mrs. Lee. Oh man. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say. This book is rather dull. It's hard to find interesting things about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are several lessons.
Nothing you could
that Jean Louise learns, but they're all you can grasp them.
Yeah,
Spark noted, like we said.
Exactly.
They'll show them to you if you can.
All of them, free of charge.
Yep. And yeah, sorry about not talking too much about Boo.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up.
Yeah.
I, I, we recorded a run of this podcast and it did not go well. And I was like, all right, we'll get back on the saddle and I'm going to do some research. I'm going to see if Boo Radley is a symbol for communism. Because I thought, based on the time frame, it's kind of Sputnik, that area, when it was written. I thought, oh, sweet. Boo Radley could be like, oh, the foreigner hiding in our midst. And it could be a symbol for, letting them in, like breaking down walls. And it's not.
If only. Wouldn't that just be terrific?
Oh, man, the Trojan horse,
that would have been such
demon.
a cool thing for
And
you
it
to
would have
bring
been
to this.
actually
Because I didn't
progressive.
know that. That would
right?
have been awesome.
Exactly. And it would have been legitimately progressive. Bob Dylan hardly talks about, like, he brings up communism, but it's not, like, the central theme. He talks about racism, which is just as important as, the Red Scare. But, boy, would it have been refreshing to have something surprising with this novel. But it's not. There would have been scholarly work on it, and I couldn't find it. And it's frustrating.
No, you give Boo Radley more character development than any colored person in the entire book.
Yeah.
Just so that Jean Louise can learn to put herself in someone else's shoes.
It's the fact that everyone's being used as almost like a ladder, like a rung for Jean Louise Finch to grow as a person is honestly despicable. Because this isn't like the sort of fun little kitschy, like 1 year in middle school sort of novel like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, where it's not meant to grab at any important ideals and it's just a kid and anecdotes about that kid growing up. And then it's like, oh yeah, they use Rowdy to illustrate this and his older brother to illustrate that and their mom and all that. No, she touches on progressive themes. She opened this door and she did not want to engage with what's inside. And if you look at Frankenstein by comparison, Mary Shelley, she touches on very briefly the idea of South Americans not existing. Or if they do exist, not being people, in quotation marks. And that's bad. But that's not the point of the novel. And the point of the novel, of it being autonomy and nurture versus nature, and all those interesting ideas, she actually brings together progressive ideas. Like if you look at how she gives the monster autonomy, and she talks about giving the female monster she's going to bring into existence autonomy. Where it's like, oh man, this monster might not listen to me. And then I'll have two angry, horny monsters terrorizing the French countryside. And it's almost a revelation in the novel where it's like, oh man, Mary actually addresses progressive ideas for her time. This being like 100 years before To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yep, in a book that's not even sold as a progressive
exactly.
book. Yeah. So yeah, when you come in and you learn that people, some people aren't people or might not be, that was a little off-putting. But
it was disheartening.
But it's not you're not there to learn life lessons about progressiveness. You're there to learn about a monster, and then you end up leaving with some a book about a little bit of equality.
Yeah, exactly. Some equity in there, and it's like if Frankenstein is a drive-in movie theater, the movie is the macabre nature of putting together a monster, the idea of hubris, the whole like modern Prometheus idea, and the popcorn and the candy is like the feminism and the acknowledging that South American people aren't people.
That's a piece of
exactly. Yeah, but the kind of candy you don't want to eat.
That's like when you get those snow caps. You think they're gonna be awesome. every time I want
They're
to
like
get
clumped
them.
up.
And then then you get a bag and they're all melted into one, and you get
Yeah,
them and eat them.
exactly. That's a drive-in movie thing. I don't think they have very good AC because they were all built in like the 1920s. What's your least favorite kind of candy? I'm putting you on the spot here.
You know what? Recently, I had a zero bar
What?
for the first time
what
in
is
my
a
life.
zero bar?
A zero bar is it's a nougat based bar with a almond flavored coating or something, or almond nougat,
Which sounds
white chocolate
bad.
almond. And I don't know. I like almond, but this thing was gross. And I don't know why. I don't know what drove me to pick it up.
Where do they sell those?
You can get them in most like convenience stores,
So
or
why
like
don't I
where
know
you get
about
a
'em?
normal can. I guess it's because nobody gets
Wants
them.
them.
It's not one that your parents would ever buy you because they may have made that mistake, or
Yeah,
someone
they don't want to
in
pass
their
that down to their
line
kids.
has.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know how they're still made because I've
Exactly.
never seen anyone pick one up like voluntarily.
Have
I
like
just was
dust
trying
on
something
it.
out.
They're like
Yeah.
cobwebs.
Well, and that could have been it too. For all I know, that very box has been there
For
since the
months,
invention
yeah.
of the bar.
Oh yeah, exactly. For since the dawn of time.
So, yeah, no, I did not like that.
That's a
What about
very
you?
unique least favorite candy.
Well, yeah, I guess it's one that a lot of people haven't even tried, and for good reason.
I might pencil that in as my least favorite candy, but
Sold it
Exactly.
pretty good there as a bad candy.
oh, that sounds absolutely terrible. Snickers is my least favorite, mostly down to execution, because I don't mind nuts, which sounds kind of weird, but I mean like peanuts, like the nuts,
Hopefully we were following.
the nuts that
Hopefully you're following.
the nuts that you eat on candy, and I don't hate them, and I like the nonsense that they put in there. That like I don't even know what you'd call it. It's like kind of like brownish. You know what I'm talking about? It's not toffee. It's like I don't know. It's the thing that like populates a Three Musketeers.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what the name
Candy
is.
stuff.
Exactly, candy material. And it's fine. But I feel like it could be a lot better. Meanwhile, Milky Way, that is what I hope to bite into when I have a Snickers.
Is that right?
I love Milky Way. And if you just combine the two, take the positives of a Snicker with the base of a Milky Way, that would be my favorite candy potentially.
That's how I feel about Almond Joy and Mounds. If you
I
combine
thought they'd
an
come
Almond
up.
Joy and a Mound, you'd have the ultimate candy.
Well, how have they not?
I can't believe it.
They're like sisters, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's got to
Yeah,
be
they're
the same
adjacent.
company. There's no
Exactly.
way.
That's a niche that's filled by one company.
And to have dark chocolate and almond and some coconut would be outstanding. But
Coconut
then-
is like a garnish almost.
Well, it's just.
You know,
It
like
needs-
where it's like
yeah.
a little bit, like
Well,
an
that's
accent.
the thing with
yeah.
the Mount. Like, you know, an Almond Joy, it's got the right ratios of everything.
Yeah.
You know, because you get the almond in there. But then the Mound, it's like, well, I like dark chocolate better, but I
Yeah,
want my damn almond.
you should
Darn.
go into that field. That's Boom and Spice candy opinions.
Candy
Because
opinions.
that's not advice. I don't know how you're. Yeah, I'd really like
Yeah,
almond
you
joy
listed
better.
Almond Joy and Mounds.
Exactly.
Do the obvious thing.
Exactly.
Like, there's no way I'm the only one. There's got to be like a Reddit for this.
All the dudes that look like Boom. What was our point? It was the drive-in movie theater thing.
Yep. And then
Where
the snow
Frankenstein
cats
sort of Trojan horses in the feminist themes. The movie you're going to see at the drive-in movie theater for To Kill a Mockingbird are the progressive themes. And then the substance is not there. So I don't even know what the candy would be. Just bad symbolism and weird white savior complex vibes. And then like unexplored symbols, like with the whole Boo Radley thing. He could be an allegory for something, and he isn't, and it's frustrating. There's the bones of a progressive novel here, but it's
Yeah.
just covered in fat. it's just covered in fat and nonsense, and I hate
Yeah,
it.
if you removed a bunch of pages, just changed a couple things, you'd have a pretty decent one.
I I think this book is not worth your time or anyone else's in terms of um, in terms of trying to suss out progressive themes. What else do you think someone could get from To Kill a Mockingbird, then, Boom? If you could think of something, if such a thing exists.
um, I guess now having listened to this podcast and maybe you could go in and kind of read for yourself and be able to pick out some aspects of a book that might make a lot of people see it as progressive and kind of be able to see for yourself, figure out things that aren't quite as so as people might generally think. Because I feel like still a lot of people, when I brought up that we were going to be doing this book, were like, "Oh my God, I love that book! Like, that was a really big one for me in middle school."
It's like you need to look at why.
Yeah, so I think you might be able to gain, like, just pick up on things a lot of people might think are big progressive themes and see for yourself why they might not be.
In the coming weeks, we will be discussing more progressive pieces of literature by women. Not our next one. I don't think Rebecca really has progressive themes within it necessarily, but that's not the point. It's very Frankenstein-esque in that way, where if you do take out societal themes, which there's way more classist themes within it
Mm-hmm.
than there are that, and also gender sort of
Gender,
specific
yeah.
themes. But in terms of race, it doesn't touch on that nearly at all.
Not
But
that I can recall.
that's not how Rebecca sells itself. It sells itself on suspense. Like, you don't get a Hitchcock adaptation of your play, in this case, or of whatever screenplay you are. In this case, a book, unless you're incredibly suspenseful. It's sold on atmosphere. It's like Boom. Have you seen the show SpongeBob SquarePants?
I have.
Exactly. It's on that Nickelodeon channel. There's a fish, right, that's crawling outside the Krusty Krab, desperate for food and water, inexplicably, because they're surrounded by water. I don't know if they're like some of them drink fresh water or something, but he's crawling past. He looks inside, and it's a ghost town. It's got cobwebs, it's got dust everywhere. It looks terrible. And he keeps going, and he goes, food, water, atmosphere. See, To Kill a Mockingbird doesn't have the atmosphere that Rebecca has. I feel like you could take a bite out of Rebecca. It's very palpable. You're living in that book. To Kill a Mockingbird feels like a veneer. It's like seeing a play where it's got a really bad background to it. Like it's so corny that you're like, I might as well be seeing like, a high school production here. This is terrible. And not to diss anyone who does high school productions of theater. I've seen some very good high school productions of things, but in that sense, it does not attempt at racial social commentary in the same way that To Kill a Mockingbird does. And I think this is an important thing for anyone who's an aspiring writer listening to this. If you decide to open that door, you need to assess what you're going to talk about. A lot of artists that don't just write, a lot of people who do music, take themes of race and social justice and they use it as a veil, and they don't have any substance. They don't push any agendas. They don't push for any action. There's no calls to action. It's merely, yeah, fight the power. Yeah, exactly. Organize. Yeah. And they don't have any substance. That's To Kill a Mockingbird. It's throwing up your hands and saying, "Aw, shucks, Tom Robinson's dead. What's for dinner?" That's essentially what's going
Yeah.
on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the end of the book. Like,
Yeah, Tom Robinson's a
upset,
footnote.
that sucks. Next day, I'm
Yeah.
still a kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Learning, now I'm going to go to my next grade.
Yeah, it's very it, it's devastating, and if it was told from Tom Robinson's point of view, it would hit a lot harder. And I don't think she could have written it from his point of view with the perspective that she had. And that's also, here's some boom and spice book advice that's incredibly serious. If you're going to write about people of color, as you should, representation is absolutely important. You need to gain perspective. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a To Kill a Mockingbird situation where you use people of color and you trivialize their the misfortunes done upon them by white people in America. And you take it and you go, hey, this would be a nice backdrop for our coming of age story. It's insidious. And if you look at something like The Green Mile, take away the magical aspects of it, the Green Mile by Stephen King, the focus is not on the warden or the people who look after him nearly as much as it's on the prisoner who ends up being executed. And I don't know if Stephen King took note from Harper Lee, but if he did, that's the same note you should take from it. Where if you're going to write about people of color, you need to come with tact, you need to come with nuance, and you cannot trivialize their misfortunes. It's similar to the trope. Do you know the bury your gays trope? Oftentimes, gay people are used as a sort of easy kill to drum up sympathy within novels and other texts. And it's so commonplace that there's an entire trope about it, the bury your gays trope. That is very reminiscent of this novel. He's used as a footnote.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry I talked for so long. This is the serious part.
Yeah, no, this has been good. I think it's a book we knew we were gonna have to do. I think we got a good bit said about it today. I think this will be a valuable tool for those of you who stuck with us.
Absolutely.
And next week we'll be on to a little bit more entertaining material.
Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is our next book. And it is a classic of the Gothic literature subgenre. And it is so much more worth your time than To Kill a Mockingbird. I cannot express it enough. So is Frankenstein, of course. However, Rebecca just it slaps.
I know. I'm excited to rave about a book again.
Yep.
Because after that first episode, during the first episode, I'm like, man, this is it. This is going to be a good series.
Exactly. And then the next book.
This is what I'm talking about. And then, book 2, less good. But like we said, it's a book we had to do. I think it's.
The point of the podcast is not to read good books.
No, not this segment of the podcast.
No. If you want good stuff, go to the short story section.
Yeah, we got good stuff going on over here.
Exactly. We've got the friends.
Rec-friendation.
Rec-friendations.
Yeah, those are coming up. Yeah, those are all going to be up. Some of them are up.
Yep. Those are for fun stuff, especially the short story ones. And this book is because it's necessary. It's similar to studying Greek mythology, where it's not always fun or interesting or neat, but there are references that will come up to Greek literature in the same way Frankenstein, in the same way Rebecca, in the same way To Kill a Mockingbird. This book is important. It may not be good, but just like your racist old grandmother, You may not like her for her opinions. She may have aged like milk in the sun, but she still is an important footnote, and she still commands attention even today. And that's To Kill a Mockingbird. It's an anachronism. It's a book that, written 30 years before, would have been an incredibly progressive masterpiece, and 30 years after would have been backwards as nobody's business. That is the lasting legacy of To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't think it's comfortable in any time, and especially not now. And if you're going to read this book, use it as a goalpost. Use it as a way to look at yourself and look at the references to it around you, how you write characters, pieces, or people of color, and how you write the people who interact with them. And above all else, when you write symbols, when you use misfortunes of others, don't trivialize them. Use them as people. And when making references to people, don't dehumanize them. Because while it may feel progressive today, it won't feel progressive tomorrow. And on behalf of Sheldon, he's Boom, and I'm Spice. You've been advised.
We'll see you next time.